Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss fantasy Formula 1. We can finally stop with all the formality. It's time to just pick my team. If you haven't been here before and this is your first time on this channel, welcome, welcome, welcome. I've done this for a year now and I enjoy every second of it. I post race reviews, previews, team selection videos, general guides, and I'm not in my usual setup. I'm in Melbourne, Australia, so any audio or visual issues, I apologize for that. But I'll try to fix them as soon as possible. I'm trying to churn all of these videos out before the deadline, as the game got released very late, just Tuesday, with a few days to spare. We've made all the guides, or at least most of the guides. I have a few more, one more in the works. But it's time to just sit down and pick my team. This is the series that's going to continue throughout the entire season, where I try to once again get the top 10k. I think it's going to be more difficult this year than last year, with more managers, more strategists being engaged with the game. So I'm going to do my best to once again reach the top 10k. I just barely squeezed in there last year after a very poor start, so it was a good recovery from me. Let's see if we can replicate that, shall we? And there's been a lot of talk throughout the week, I suppose. What teams are the best, which structure you should go for. And we learned how the budget building worked yesterday evening. If you haven't watched that video, it's on my channel right now. You should check that out. We think we know how the new price increase system works. So that's going to play some parts into my thinking for this. But if you don't want to, sit down and learn all the nitty-gritty about it, all you really need to know is that we expect the first race to see many drops in price. Then we're going to see a slight recovery in China. And then from race 3 and onwards, we're expecting to see a big inflation in prices, meaning most assets will go up in price. I might have had the numbers slightly off in my budget building video. I'm still trying to check what's correct, what I missed, but it is possible that I was slightly off. I'm not off on the sort of overhaul assessment that, a lot of prices will go down in Melbourne, then, slight bounce back in China, and then third race in Japan, things are going to start moving upwards. But I might have been a bit wrong with the numbers. I'm checking, we'll see. But for now, that is what I'm thinking with budget building. In fact, budget building from race 1 feels very dead. You really need to get lucky in race 1. Most of your assets are going to fall in price, and especially those cheap assets. I mean, if you get a DNF on one of your drivers, they are just jumping down 0.6 million. And for that reason, I don't know which way to go with my team, right? You could try and go for this budget building structure, all out budget building, race 1, try and get as much budget as you can, then limitless in race 2 to get proper constructors in there, and then race 3 wildcard. I might already wildcard in game week 3, or in race week 3, sorry, just because of the fact that we will have these 2 races, so we will now know or have an idea of who is going to increase in price, right? Since the driver increases are now based on the past 3 race weekends. If you have a driver who has 2 good race weekends now, decent one in Melbourne, decent one in China, you can suspect that they will also then increase in Japan. Whereas someone, let's say one of your budget drivers gets a 2-pointer in Melbourne and a DNF in China, they are going to need a big point haul in Japan to actually increase in price. So I feel like that's what we really need to look at. In race 3, we can really start, looking at the budget building and sort of plan our transfers sort of around that, and at least avoid those drivers who are going to go down most certainly. But with that said, I'm going to show you my budget building team last in this video. So if that's what you want to see, you can skip ahead. But for now, this team that I'm going to build right in front of you is what I'm likely to go with. Granted, this is before any practice sessions. I'm recording this early Friday morning. So this is about 6 hours before practice 1. And before I build this team, I need to announce the most important thing on this channel, right? The most important thing on this channel are the deadline streams. I love doing the deadline streams. It's what I enjoyed doing the most out of all of the things I do on my channel, and I did them for most races last year once I started doing them around Canada. My plan this year with the deadline streams is to do a deadline stream for every weekend. But this week, I'm in Melbourne. I'm going to be at Albert Park. I'm going to want to watch qualifying live there. So obviously I cannot do a pre-deadline stream or a full-on deadline stream, I suppose, because I'm at the track, right? This is a once in a lifetime experience. I'm not gonna want to miss that. But also it is an early morning quali start for most of you who are in Europe or the Americas. So what my plan is to do is to do a post FP2 pre-deadline stream, an earlier deadline stream, and this will be done UK time, so GMT, 7 p.m. on Friday evening, right? 7 p.m. Friday evening. That is 6 a.m. Saturday, my time, track time. I'm gonna get up super early before I head to the track on Saturday, before watching FP3, and do my deadline stream. Is going to be a shorter one, about an hour to an hour and a half. And obviously we can't look at FP3 simulations from Arthur and F1 Fantasy Tools, but we can do some of the things that we always do: the team submissions. We can look at the FP2 sims. We can see what the result was from practice and discuss all of that. So what I'm showing you now, the team I'm building, is what I'm looking at going into practice. But if practice shows us something vastly different, then of course this could change. And if you want to see what that change is, join me for the deadline stream. Again, 7 p.m. GMT Friday, 6 a.m. Saturday track time. So yeah, let's just get into it. And we've talked a lot about the big constructors, right? The big constructors are getting a lot of points, so we expect them to be good. I think the safest option is to start with these big constructors. And that is what I'm going to do. Now, there's really three that I've considered. I haven't really stretched to Red Bull Racing yet. I would need to see something in practice from them to actually, take the leap and go for Red Bull Racing in my team. The options I've considered personally are McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes. And because of how the pricing is made this year, McLaren and Ferrari together doesn't work. You cannot fit a premium driver alongside them, meaning you don't have a good driver for your 2X, which I think is important. So for that reason, Mercedes is in there as my second constructor. The question then is, do we go for McLaren or do we go for Ferrari? And that's actually going to depend on which driver I want. I am a Ferrari fan. I do think McLaren will be better, but I'm actually picking Ferrari in here, and you will see why in a second. Ferrari is still going to be good, I suspect, and I am going to be spreading myself out over multiple teams here as a sort of safety net early build. And the reason why I say that is because my DRS boosted driver, premium driver of choice, is Oscar Piastri. I would love to have Oscar Piastri plus McLaren, right? Oscar Piastri, McLaren, Mercedes. But unfortunately, there's just not enough budget for that. And I was looking at this and I was thinking, do I go for someone like a Hamilton or Leclerc to double dip on the Ferrari? Or do I do this sort of build with George Russell and maybe McLaren in there? That's also an option I've considered. But ultimately, Oscar's in his home race. I expect Oscar to be good. And I just think the McLaren looks fast. I would be really surprised if Oscar wasn't on the podium. Obviously, if he DNFs, but I think if in a regular sort of result weekend, I feel like Oscar's going to perform in his home race. And if he does perform in his home race, even if he gets P2 or P3, he could be the driver to get driver of the day. I think there are only a few drivers that would get it ahead of him, if they were behind. I say if Oscar Piastri was second and Lewis Hamilton or one of the rookies, Antonelli or Lawson, was third, I could see them getting it. But if it's Lando or Max in the lead or on the podium anywhere together with Piastri, I think Piastri might be the one to get driver of the day. Even with Leclerc in there, Leclerc super popular, but if it's like Norris, Leclerc, Piastri, I could see Piastri being the one to from P3 get driver of the day just because of it being his home race. Similarly, George Russell, if George Russell's in there, he's not a super popular driver right now, not that popular in F1 Fantasy either. But it's just, I feel like Piastri, the only one of the top 8 drivers that really scream a bigger driver of the day opportunity on a good performance is Lewis Hamilton, because it's his first race in Ferrari. So I have considered that, but I do think Oscar Piastri is the one I will go for. And I've just not been able to get away from having McLaren coverage. I feel like I need to have either Piastri or the McLaren constructor. And with Lewis Hamilton, I also can't afford the McLaren constructor. The only way I can get the McLaren constructor in, really with the team I want to build, is with George Russell as my DRS driver. And while I don't think that's a bad idea at all, I just slightly prefer this variant. And I'm also, covering a bit more of a wide stance, having both McLaren as at Ferrari and Mercedes. I'm obviously slightly limiting myself to the ceiling that this team can reach, but I'm also not going to drop off massively if one of my drivers don't perform. So with that, we have 27.2 million left in the team. What do we pick then? Well, let's start looking at the cheap drivers. And I think, you see the ownership of these drivers. A lot of people are owning them. The first one I'm going to have is Gabriel Bortoleto. I think he could have the show effect from last year, starting, further back in qualifying and then moving up in the race. Or if there's DNFs in a rainy Melbourne start, he could be further back, avoid the carnage, and then, sail up into P15 or something for a good solid score. I'm less interested in someone like a Hadjar, who I think if anyone were to be involved in that crash, I do think it could be Hadjar. He feels like a bin it or win it type driver, where either he has an amazing performance or the car does not cross the finish line. So I'm trying to personally avoid Hadjar as much as possible. And I'm also just not interested in that V-carb car at all. I can just, they feel like such P12, P13 merchants that's just not going to get anywhere in the race. So that leaves 21.2 million after Gabriel Bortoleto. Let's take the most expensive of my budget drivers, and that's going to be Esteban Ocon. I talked about this with in my chat with Formula Fantasy Hub, Rob. If you haven't seen that video, you should definitely watch it. I know it's a bit of a longer one. We chat on for 40 plus minutes. But we say some pretty great stuff in that video, and the conversation just spun off into a longer form content. I think Ocon is the most underpriced asset in the game, and especially when we consider that the price increases are most definitely based on points per million. If anyone can reach their targeted score of 8 points, which would be Ocon's, I think Ocon is the one to do it. I think Ocon can definitely reach 8 points. I'm surprised they priced Haas this low. And one thing that we said in that video was, if Esteban Ocon and Yuki Tsunoda had their prices switched, so Esteban Ocon was 9.6 and Yuki Tsunoda was 7.3, I would still prefer Ocon over Tsunoda at that price. I think Ocon is the lowest. I think Ocon is the most underpriced asset in the game. I think Yuki Tsunoda is probably the most overpriced asset in the game. I think I've really struggled to build a team without Ocon, and when I've not been able to fit in Ocon due to budget constraints, I've actually been upset. I've been I need to change my team so I can get Ocon in. I just feel like he's going to be a fantastic just budget option, both for price increases and points. So yeah, I'm really excited with Esteban Ocon. And Esteban Ocon and Gabriel Bortoleto are really the two drivers who have been in all of my drafts so far. With that, then we're back. We're only at 13.9 million. What can we afford with that? And right now, the two drivers I'm looking at are Jack Doohan and Oliver Behrman. More rookies in there, I know, but I'm not really interested in getting Nico Hülkenberg in. And as I said previously, I'm actually trying to avoid Hadjar if I can. I much prefer Bortoleto. Jack Doohan, then, I feel like he could pop up. It is his home race. He could for sure also be involved in a crash, but he is in a faster car I could see him being poor in qualifying and then at least having some pace in that Alpine to climb a couple of positions. So I actually really like Doohan as an option. He's way cheaper than Gasly. You still get some of the Alpine coverage. It's still sort of unknown how well he's going to perform, but I feel like I'd rather take the bet with him than someone like a Hadjar. And really, there's nothing else that I can actually afford with these prices, right? Oliver Behrman, most owned asset, I think, in the game at 60%. Yeah, it's at 60%. Carlos Sainz is at 59% now. I think Oliver Behrman is a fantastic option as well. I'm less keen on him than like 60% of people are, but he's just in that good price point where it's easy to afford him. He's the fourth cheapest driver. So even if you're running the cheapest drivers available, the CDAs, you have to have Behrman in there. And once you can stretch from someone like a Hadjar up to Behrman for those two, 0.4 million, or from a Bortoleto up to Behrman, 0.7, what did I say, 0.4, 0.5 million or 0.7 million. I feel like that's a kind of a no-brainer to actually make that swap up to Behrman. He was good last year. He wasn't great in the rain in Brazil, and we're getting a rainy race in Melbourne. So I have taken that into account, but I also just can't get away from Behrman. The other option, I wish I could like maybe build a team with Alonso, because I am interested in Alonso as an option, but unfortunately I just can't afford that. And obviously I'm not then interested in Lance Stroll. I couldn't even fit him in there even if I wanted to. I'm 0.4 million away from Hadjar, and at that point I would need to downgrade someone like an Ocon down to Behrman to be able to afford it, and that's just not what I want. So really, like, what's the point of picking Hadjar Hulkenberg when I can upgrade both of them with this team to Behrman and Jack Doohan, which I am likely to do. And like after that, you have Ocon, and then the next price point is Stroll and Alonso. So it feels like the team kind of picks itself. This is exactly within the budget, 0.0 million in the bank. I'm not too fussed about not having money in the bank. If I need money, I could always switch to a sort of budget building strategy in Japan and switch Mercedes for a cheaper constructor that's performing well, and sort of ride that for a couple of races, maybe do the limitless in something like Miami, and budget build for a couple of races. I just think at the start of the season, especially since we're not 100% sure how it works yet with budget building, I don't want to go all the way there. And especially also since it looks like it's going to be difficult to rise in price for the first race, and then from race 3 and onwards it's going to be much, much easier. We can really have a look at, okay, who of the cheap constructors is the best option for building a budget building focused team, and then we can pick that in Japan and then ride that to maybe like Monaco, and switch it back to premium constructors there. So that's sort of my plan. That's sort of my long-term plan, is to just do these 2 first races. We'll see what I do in China if I play any chips. But if I'm playing with premium assets like I'm doing here, I'm very likely to not limitless in China at least, and hold off on that. And then in Japan, just look at which drivers are performing well, do some sideways moves perhaps, and hopefully start gaining, at least some budget. But I did promise you that we would show the budget building team if you want to start for that. Now, I have a problem. I have 3 teams here. I don't know if you can see them all. But the third team, I don't know why, I can't open it on my browser. The third team just doesn't work. So we're going to do this second team, and I'm going to... Oh, wait, I can't do it there either. Do you have this problem? Whenever I click manage team, that's not my first team, it just doesn't work. So I'm going to show you it on my first team, but know that it's not going to be my first team. It's likely going to be my third. So the key for budget building, even if my calculations were wrong in the budget building video, is that we think cheap constructors are going to be the key for almost guaranteed budget gains with the new pit stop change, since they're not compared to other constructors, they're just compared to their own price. So the cheap constructors really have an opportunity to grow a lot in price as long as they just get a, you know, not a DNF score. So the best way to budget build is to go with, I think, Alpine and Haas. I think Williams are slightly too expensive, where you could see them like having just a bad race and then not reaching the points threshold needed just because of the fact that there's 13 million and they have a higher points per million needed. So I do think you go for Alpine plus Haas if you're trying to budget build. If you do this build, you 100% limitless in China, because you limitless in China don't get so you basically just ruin your points for this first race in Melbourne. In China, you limitless, get the super mega team, get all the points, you get the budget increases for Alpine and Haas, which in a, you know, sprint race, as long as they don't DNF, should get good increases there as well. And then in the third race, you either wildcard into the proper team or move around based on the results you've seen so far. But Alpine and Haas are the two cheap constructors that I think you pick if you want to go full budget building at the start. And at that point, you just got to start looking at the drivers that you can afford and decide which are underpriced to their points per million. Now, you would think that, okay, you should, if you're budget building, you should only go for the cheaper drivers that are below 20 million so that they could increase 0.6 million. And while you might be right, I think it's going to be very difficult to predict which drivers below 20 million actually do reach the points threshold that they need. Even someone like an Antonelli or Lawson needs to hit like 20-ish points in that first race, and you can definitely see them being P7, P8 and getting like a 15-point score in the first race and not increasing the maximum, which would be 0.2, whereas these premium drivers, if they increase the maximum, is 0.3. So for that reason, I do think it's okay to, even on a budget building team, pick premium drivers. And the premium drivers of choice right now, for me at least, I would go for someone like a Charles Leclerc. Getting something like a 27-point score feels very doable for him. I think he's definitely aiming for that podium. He's been very good in Australia before. I think, you know, Leclerc can definitely reach that higher points threshold. I think once again, Piastri, really good shout. I would probably 2x Piastri over Leclerc on this team. And then after this, you have the budget to go for one of the two rookies, Antonelli or Lawson. I'm just going to lock in Antonelli for now. And then after that, you can fit in both Esteban Ocon and Oliver Bearman, leaving 2.2 million to move around if you need to. Once we get to Japan, I think this team is what I would build if I was going for full budget building, and I think I'm doing this on like my second or third team to hopefully gain some budget, and maybe I can see, you know, come race 3 which team is doing the best and kind of focus on that. But yeah, it looks super weird. I know you're definitely going to fall behind on points with this team. But again, that's the budget building way. You focus on budget gains now, get the points later once you have more budget than the rest and can afford more expensive drivers, or more expensive assets, I should say. So yeah, this is the team I would go for budget building. You could do changes to this. You don't have to build it like this. You could definitely restructure it to a, you know, where you have Lando Norris in here. If you think Lando Norris is the one who's going to win the race, and at that point you can't afford one of the rookies, but you can go for Carlos Sainz in here, and maybe upgrade Bearman then to something like a Fernando Alonso. I don't think this is awful either. It's all up to you, you know, what you want to do with the drivers. You just basically have to look at the drivers and think who is going to beat their points per million score. Is Sainz going to get above 13 points? I'm not so sure. I'm personally not that keen. I'm even less keen on Sainz and like Gasly than I was before, especially for these first two races, since the points per million needed for them is so high. I could definitely see, you know, if Sainz gets a 10-point score, I would say that's good. That's not enough for him to increase 0.6 million. He would need something like a 15-pointer. To actually increase the maximum. So for that reason, I actually think Sainz is bad for budget building. I would rather have, you know, the Bearman and the Ocon with, you know, slightly cheaper drivers than someone like an expensive Lando Norris. But yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't, please like the video, and if you also haven't, please subscribe. Majority of people who watch the videos aren't subscribed for some reason. It's super free. You can just do it, and then if you don't like my videos in the future, you can just unsubscribe. No hard feelings. I'm just asking that you consider to actually subscribe now. If you want the premium features of F1 Fantasy Tools, amazing website, I have a code down in the description that you can use to get 50% off your first month. The perfect asset for your F1 Fantasy 2025 season, your perfect companion. And I will hopefully see you on the pre-deadline stream at, again, let me remind you, 7 p.m. GMT Friday evening, or if you're local track time Australia, it's 6 a.m. I apologize for that if you're Aussie, but I mean, I'm gonna go to the track to watch the game, so I had to do it at some point in the morning. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on the pre-deadline stream. I'm so excited to be back. Let's try and aim for that top 10K once again. It's going to be an amazing year. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.